Billionaire father sees black waitress let his disabled son lead a dance step, and his life changes. What if a single act of understanding could break through the walls of wealth, privilege, and prejudice, and bring two seemingly disconnected worlds together? What if the true power of connection wasn't found in words, but in simple, human gestures of empathy? Rita Jackson moved through the upscale restaurant with the grace of someone who'd learned to navigate chaos. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet strength, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of wisdom forged in hardship. Her uniform was crisp, her smile practiced, but beneath it all was a woman who'd fought for every inch of her life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, where hope was a luxury and survival was the goal, Rita had learned early to shield what mattered most. For her, that was Marcus, her 10-year-old son, whose autism made the world a maze of overwhelming sounds and unspoken rules. Marcus was her light, her reason for waking up each morning. He loved music, the way it wove patterns he could understand, but crowds were his kryptonite. Rita had spent years teaching him small ways to cope, counting breaths, tapping rhythms on his wrist, but she never hit him. She refused to let the world erase her son, even when it tried. At home, in their modest apartment, Marcus would hum melodies, his fingers dancing in the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. But out here, in the glittering world of the wealthy, Rita kept him close, tucked away in the restaurant's back room during her shifts, where he could listen to his music through headphones and stay safe from judgment. Tonight was different. The restaurant was hosting a charity gala, a dazzling affair filled with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tailored suits and designer gowns, and the air buzzed with self-important chatter. Rita wove through the crowd, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres, her smile a mask she'd perfected over years of serving people who rarely saw her. She stole glances at Marcus, who sat quietly in a corner booth, his headphones on, swaying gently to a song only he could hear. She'd brought him tonight because her usual sitter had cancelled, and she couldn't afford to miss the shift. The extra tips from events like this paid for Marcus's therapy sessions, and every penny mattered. Across the room, Thomas Walker stood tall, his tailored suit impeccable, his presence commanding. At 42, he was a billionaire entrepreneur, the kind of man whose name appeared on skyscrapers and in headlines. His tech empire had reshaped industries, but tonight, he was here for his son, Elijah. At 16, Elijah was the reluctant guest of honor, expected to give a speech about the charity his father's foundation supported. But Elijah hated crowds. His social anxiety was a silent battle, one Thomas had never fully understood. To the world, Elijah was the heir to a fortune, poised and polished. In reality, he was a boy who preferred books to banquets, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his father's expectations. Thomas watched Elijah now, standing stiffly near the stage, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs of his suit jacket. Thomas felt a familiar pang of guilt. He'd given his son everything: private tutors, sprawling estates, a future paved with gold, but he couldn't give him ease. Elijah's discomfort was a mirror to Thomas's own failures as a father, a reminder of the distance between them. He'd built walls around his son, thinking wealth could shield him from the world's harshness, but those walls had only trapped them both. The evening was in full swing when it happened. Marcus, overwhelmed by a sudden swell of music from the live band, slipped out of his booth, his headphones slipping off. His small frame darted through the crowd, his hands flapping in a familiar self-soothing gesture. Rita, serving a table nearby, didn't see him until it was too late. Marcus bumped into Elijah, who was standing near the dessert table, trying to blend into the background. A glass of sparkling water tipped verbal, shattering on the floor. The sound was a gunshot in the elegant room, and all eyes turned. Elijah froze, his face paling as the crowd's attention pinned him in place. Marcus, startled by the noise, let out a low, distressed hum, his hands covering his ears. Whispers spread like wildfire, judgmental, curious, dismissive. Rita dropped her tray and rushed to Marcus, her heart pounding. She knelt beside him, her voice steady despite the stares. "Marcus, sweetheart, you're okay. Let's count together. 1, 2, 3. Thomas, standing a few feet away, watched the scene unfold. He saw the way Rita's hands gently guided Marcus's, the way her eyes held no shame, only love. He saw Elijah, still frozen, his own discomfort mirrored in Marcus's distress. Something stirred in Thomas, a flicker of recognition. He'd spent years shielding Elijah from moments like this, whisking him away from anything that might expose his vulnerabilities. But Rita didn't hide her son. She stood in the center of the storm, unapologetic, teaching him to navigate it. Rita, sensing the crowd's judgment, made a choice. Instead of pulling Marcus away, she took his hand and turned to Elijah. "Marcus, this is a new friend. Want to say hi?" Her voice was calm, encouraging. Marcus hesitated, his eyes flicking to Elijah's. Slowly, he extended a trembling hand. "Hi," he whispered, the word a small victory. Elijah blinked, surprised. He glanced at his father, then back at Marcus. Something in the younger boy's earnestness cut through his anxiety. He reached out, his own hand shaking slightly, and clasped Marcus's. "Hi," he said softly. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, the two boys stood there, connected by a simple gesture, their differences fading in the face of shared humanity. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He'd never seen Elijah reach out like that, never seen him bridge the gap between himself and another person. And it was this woman, this waitress, who'd made it happen. Her strength, her refusal to let the world dictate her son's worth, struck Thomas like a revelation. He'd spent his life building empires, but this small act of kindness held more power than any deal he'd ever closed. After the gala, Thomas couldn't shake the image of Rita and Marcus. He approached her as the event wound down, while she was clearing tables. "Miss Jackson," he began, his voice formal but warm, "I saw what you did with your son and mine. It was extraordinary." Rita paused, wary. She was used to people offering pity or condescension, not admiration. "I just did what any mother would do," she said, her tone guarded. "No," Thomas insisted. "You showed him how to stand tall. And you showed my son something I've never been able to, how to connect." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to offer you a position at my company. We're launching a diversity initiative, and we need someone with your insight, your strength." Rita stared at him, stunned. A job like that could change everything. Better pay, stability, a future for Marcus. But she wasn't naive. She knew the gap between their worlds, the assumptions people would make about a single black mother working for a billionaire. Still, she saw something in Thomas's eyes. Not pity, but respect. She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." Over the next few weeks, Rita joined Thomas's company as a consultant, bringing her perspective to boardrooms that had never heard voices like hers. She was a natural, her empathy and resilience cutting through corporate jargon. Thomas found himself drawn to her, not just as a colleague but as a person. Their conversations, initially professional, grew personal. Rita shared stories of Marcus's small triumphs, like the first time he'd spoken in a group setting. Thomas opened up about Elijah, about the guilt he carried for pushing his son into a world that didn't fit him. One evening as they worked late, Thomas admitted, "I've given Elijah everything, but I don't know him. I don't know how to reach him." His voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability Rita hadn't expected. She saw past the billionaire facade to the man beneath, isolated by his own success. Rita hesitated, then said, "You don't have to fix him, Thomas. Just listen. Let him be who he is." It was advice she'd learned through years of advocating for Marcus, and it resonated with Thomas in a way nothing else had. As their bond deepened, Rita and Thomas faced their own walls. Rita had spent years protecting herself and Marcus, wary of letting anyone in. Thomas's world, with its wealth and privilege, felt foreign, even intimidating. But she saw the way he looked at her, not as a savior or a project, but as an equal. And Thomas, for the first time, began to see beyond his own carefully constructed life. He realized how hollow it felt, how his wealth had insulated him from the connections that mattered most. The turning point came at a company event, a smaller gathering where families were invited. Marcus and Elijah, now tentative friends, were there, and Rita suggested they try something new, a simple dance step. Marcus, who loved music, lit up at the idea. Rita guided him gently, letting him lead, his movements awkward but joyful. Elijah, hesitant at first, joined in, his own steps cautious but earnest. The sight of the two boys, so different yet so alike, moving together in their own imperfect rhythm, brought tears to Rita's eyes. Thomas watched, his heart swelling. He'd never seen Elijah so unguarded, so free. And it was Rita who'd made it possible. In that moment, he realized he didn't just admire her, he was falling for her. But more than that, he saw a path forward, not just for himself but for Elijah. He didn't need to mold his son into someone else, he needed to let him be. Rita, too, felt the shift. She'd spent so long fighting alone that letting someone in felt like a risk. But Thomas wasn't just a billionaire offering her a job, he was a man trying to find his way, just as she was. Their connection wasn't about charity or obligation, it was about mutual need, about two people learning to lower their defenses. Over the next year, Rita and Thomas's relationship grew, not into a fairy tale romance but into a partnership built on trust. They worked together to create programs that gave people like Marcus and Elijah a voice, a place to belong. Elijah began to thrive, finding confidence in small moments, like teaching Marcus a new dance step or reading him a book. Marcus, in turn, showed Elijah how to find joy in the simplest things, like the rhythm of a song. Thomas learned to listen, not just to Elijah but to himself. He stepped back from the relentless pace of his empire, making space for the family he'd neglected. Rita, meanwhile, found a new kind of strength, not in fighting alone, but in letting someone share her burdens. She moved into a better apartment, one with a room where Marcus could play his music without fear of judgment. And she began to dream again, not just for Marcus but for herself. The final scene unfolded at another charity gala, a year after the first. This time, Elijah stood on stage, not as the guest of honor but as himself, speaking about the importance of understanding and inclusion. Marcus sat in the front row, his headphones off, clapping loudly when Elijah finished. Rita and Thomas stood together in the back, their hands brushing, a quiet promise of what they'd built. As the music swelled, Marcus tugged at Elijah's sleeve, pulling him onto the dance floor. The two boys moved together, their steps clumsy but full of heart. Rita laughed, her eyes shining, and Thomas felt something he hadn't in years: peace. They weren't perfect, any of them, but they were real. And in that moment, they were enough. Rita's small act of courage, teaching Marcus to reach out, to connect, had rippled outward, touching lives she never could have imagined. It had given Elijah the freedom to be himself, Thomas the chance to be a better father, and Rita herself a future she'd never dared to dream of. Their story wasn't about wealth or status, it was about the power of seeing someone, truly seeing them, and choosing to stand with them in a world that often looks away. As the gala ended, Rita looked at Marcus, twirling happily with Elijah, and at Thomas, who met her gaze with a quiet smile. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, worlds like theirs didn't merge without friction, but she also knew they'd face it together. And that was more than enough.